Professor Ratna Ghosh, Distinguished Professor Emerita, McGill University. Ma'am is going to be the chairperson in this session. Ma'am, can we have you on the stage, please? To please felicitate Professor Ratna Ghosh. Sir will be the chairperson in this session. The speaker for this session, Saurav Ray, Founder Director, Monisha Biotech. Saurav Ray, sir, to please begin with the session.
And to all the delegates seated on the chair and on the dais as well as outside there. I am Saurav Ray, Founder Director of Monisha Biotech. And the topic today which I am going to present is an endeavor to disable a major cause of disabilities and deaths. The pictures out here which I am displaying is very disturbing. But can anybody of you guess what must have caused this? Some sort of? Okay.
Accidents.
Accidents, yes, definitely, there are accidents. Without any speck of doubt, there are accidents.
Motor accidents or vehicular accidents.
Possible? Now, at least if we are not being able to, none of these answers are correct. Yeah, accident is a very generic sort of a word, so you are correct in a way, right? But at least we can feel the excruciating pain which these people must be undergoing when they have to undergo such a situation and a circumstance. It's snake bite. All this had been caused by snake bites. Snake bite is the most neglected of all the neglected diseases put together, and this is our late Director General of WHO, Dr. Kofi Annan. He said that snake bite is the biggest public health crisis you have likely never heard of. I've got a small video to play out here, which I think I would be able to. Because this is going to give you a perspective. Can somebody help me get to the video, please? तो वीडियो ऐसे है स्किप करिए कि बाद में पेन ड्राइव में भी ऐसे to show is that urban phenomena, snake bite is not at all an urban phenomena. So, sitting out here, we cannot even gauge the magnitude of this crisis. So, by that video, I would have loved to give you a revelation as to what the extent of the crisis is. But nevertheless, I'll try to take you through my slides only. In 2017, WHO announced snakebite to be a neglected tropical disease. As you can see, globally every year, the neglected tropical diseases like dengue, Chagas disease and all, they take around 1,25,000 lives. Snakebite alone takes around 1,40,000 lives every year globally. And the countries which you are seeing out here are the ones which are mostly affected. Now, of this 1,40,000 deaths which happen globally every year, almost about 50,000 deaths happen in India alone. So, we unfortunately carry the disgraceful stigma of being a snake bite death capital of the world. Now here we are talking about snake bite deaths, which is mortality. As per WHO, whatever is the number of mortalities, 4 to 5 times is the magnitude of morbidities, which means a person is losing their leg, hand, so on and so forth. So if you consider 50,000 to be the number of deaths every year in India, almost about 2.5 lakh people are losing their limbs. Now, I am also part of the ICMR National Task Force on Snakebite Research in India. So there was a revelation. I'll share that with you. It says that whatever snakebite deaths and disabilities are getting reported, not just in India but in the other developing nations, it's only around 8 to 10% of what that happens. So you can actually imagine if mortality and morbidity put together, let's talk about India now, it's 3 lakhs. So the real magnitude of snakebite deaths and disabilities in our country is to the tune of almost. So if 3 lakhs is 10%, so it's almost about 30 lakhs every year. Deaths and disabilities put together. But I'd like to ask you a question to this audience. Before I started giving this presentation, anybody of you were aware of this fact? That this is the magnitude of the deaths and disabilities in a country? Right. You know why? The reason being that snake bite, it is not an exaggeration if I say it's predominantly a rural phenomenon. So people who are losing their lives and limbs are the poor farmers, the farm laborers, the fishermen, the daily wage earners, and unfortunately they don't have a proper dais to go and voice their grievances. So we don't know about this. Every 5 minutes, 50 people are bitten by a snake. This is a world figure. This is presented by WHO, of which 1 is going to die and 4 are going to get disabled. In most of the platforms when we go and talk about, we are talking about deaths. But disability is something which we cannot ignore. And I can vouch for the fact I have gone extensively worked in Africa, Southeast Asian countries, India, Australia and all. I have found out, yes, death is bad, but disability can be even worse. I know of families in villages whereby just to fund the medication process of the person, the children had to be taken out of schools. The land, the cattle had to be sold off just to fund the medication process of snake bites. Now, let me tell you, by now you must have understood this, India is at the epicenter of a major public health crisis. These are some of the excerpts from very eminent newspapers. Now, this is at this corner, this is a very important piece of information. Previously, I was talking about that snake bite is predominantly a rural phenomenon. Now, if it's a rural phenomenon, there's a place called Newtown Rajarhat, which is very near to our city of Kolkata. About 5-6 months back, there have been 3 deaths because of snake bites in Newtown Rajarhat. So, the crisis of snake bite is slowly and gradually crossing the urban periphery and entering the ambit of the rural periphery and then entering the ambit of the urban arena. So now this is a matter of concern. The reasons are many. Because by the dint of our technology, what we Homo sapiens humans are doing is that we are encroaching into their land. So this human-snake conflict is on the rise. The second point is that global warming. You know, snakes are basically ectotherms. What they do is that their entire process of life is dependent on external temperature, apart from other things, humidity and illumination also, but primarily temperature. So although we consider that yes, there is a global warming and 0.5 degrees Celsius temperature has risen, for a snake it means a lot. I'll give you a small example. Previously, let's say 20-25 years back, in Calcutta, the extent of winter was pretty extended. 2-3 months we used to get winter. Now we don't. Implication is that the snake's breeding time has actually relatively increased compared to the previous years. As they breed, so there will be more babies, proliferation, and we will come more in contact with them. So it's a matter of concern. Now, why in India, in spite of making so much progress in various other aspects and fields of life, why we are actually lagging behind as far as addressing snake bite is concerned? You know, in India, we get 300 species of snakes, of which around 60 are venomous. But 12 are medically important. What does that mean? Have you ever heard about a king cobra? It's a very big snake. King cobras in India are not medically important. Why? Because they prefer to stay in dense forest areas and all, away from human habitats, so that level of interaction with humans is less. But out of the 60 venomous snake species, unfortunately, although there are 12 medically important snake species we get in India, we get the antivenom. What is an antivenom? When a person gets bitten by a snake bite, it is that antivenom injection which is given. In India, the available antivenom is for just 4 species of snakes. So what happens to the rest 8, 10 biting? Nobody has an answer. So again, I'll tell you about a very interesting phenomenon. You see, in India, the highest number of snake bite antivenom manufacturers we get in India. Now this was something which got us thinking that if on one side we are having the highest number of snake bite antivenom manufacturers in India, why is it that we are also having the highest number of snake bite deaths and disabilities? One of the major reasons being that the antivenom which we get in India presently or for the last few many decades has been designed to work only in the southern tip of the country. Why is this so? I'll give you a small metaphor about this. You know, the snake species which we get, morphologically they look very similar. But if you consider a cobra, in the eastern part of the country, west, north, south, they look very similar. But their venom nature is very different. What is the implication? The implication is that, God forbid, if somebody is bitten by a cobra in the eastern part of the country, that person needs to be treated with an antivenom which has been made by using venom from the eastern part of the country only. Only then it's going to be effective. But for the last few decades, the entire country's antivenom is being made by sourcing venom from just 1 or 2 districts of South India. So, the more we digress from the southern part of the country, the efficacy of the antivenom goes down. In eastern part of the country, northern part of India and western, we have records whereby the recommended dosage of antivenom vials, 10 ml vials, is let's say 15 to 20 vials. Here 60, 70, 80 vials have been administered, but the person still succumbed to the snake bite. Now see, this is a Russell's viper, which is one of the very venomous snakes which we get in India. And this is what that happens when a Russell's viper bites. Some of the symptoms. You see this portion? Now you consider a person who is alive, not dead. And this gangrene sort of a thing that forms, it spreads. And that person's family has to actually fund that medication process. This is what that happens when there is a saw-skinned viper. This is again a species of snake. Fortunately in West Bengal we don't get it. We get it in the southern part of India. We get it in Orissa, Jharkhand and all. Just think about the plight of this victim. This is what that happens when there is a cobra bite. In India there are 2-3 species of cobra, but predominantly we get the monocled cobra. In Bengali we call it Curated, and that's the spectacled cobra we call the gokro. So this is what that happens. Now this is a crate. You know, people who are from Sundarban is like a mangrove delta, you all would be knowing possibly. There the people out there are more afraid of crates as compared to tigers and crocodiles. Because the crate is a silent killer. This is having one of the most toxic venom in this country. A crate, what it does is that it enters the place, bites and there's no pain. It's presynaptic neurotoxins, the venom nature. So people do not know whether he has been bitten by a snake. In the middle of the night, there's a sort of a vomiting tendency, and the doctor is also not in a position to judge that whether it's a crate bite or the stomach upset or some other sort of a thing, and the person dies. This is a very interesting statistic. If you see to that portion, you see the people who are dying and suffering from snake bites are mainly, predominantly 57 to 60% are in the age category of 30 to 60 years. So which means they are the breadwinner of the family. What happens to the family whose breadwinner has died? The other part is that you see male, 60% are male. So we have to think about that also. And we are, at Monosha Biotech, we are thinking about that. At Monosha Biotech, we believe that snake bite is such a thing whereby you cannot take up the issue in silos. Let's say good antivenom manufacturing, that is not sufficient. Let's say awareness, that's also not sufficient. So we talk about pre-bite, we talk about post-bite. And whatever resources we have, we are committed and dedicated to address the entire chain of snake bites. So here we are actually going into villages, creating awareness that yes, snake bite is something which can be avoided with certain basic precautions in place. So this is a part of that. We are actually, 2023 in February, March, we have been working with the Government of West Bengal Forest Department, the World Wildlife Fund, and we put together, we have trained around 130 volunteers in all the villages of Sundarbans. And that is an excerpt from that. What it does, let's say a snake enters the house. The person doesn't know how to tackle that snake. And many of the cases, the snake bite happens because the person is not aware of the nature of the snake. A viper would be biting in some manner, a crane would be biting in another manner. So with these volunteers whom we have created, we have imparted them the training to actually practically handle snakes. And also, they are the first responders. We have taught them that in case of a bite, what needs to be done till the point of time the victim reaches a formal medical system. This is again, we are engaged with, we are also called in by the police department because the police personnel, they are posted in remote areas whereby snake is a problem. So we are interacting with them. And this is one of the major responsibilities which we have been bestowed upon. You know, I was mentioning about venom, anti-venom. Anti-venom is something which can be made by using venom only. And in the eastern part of the country, we have set up a serpentarium. Serpentarium is a place where we keep snakes. So, there's a place, there's a district called 24 Parganas South, Baruipur. At Baruipur, we have the largest collection of venomous snakes in the country and the second largest in Asia. So what we are doing is that, this is our basic responsibility, we are extracting the venom. So, venom doesn't only kill lives. It saves lives also, because with this venom, anti-venom would be made, and that anti-venom would be used to save the lives and the lives of many snake bite victims. As I mentioned, we are a serpentarium and a venom bank, and we are producing venom for the first time in India, which is adhering to the recommendations of the WHO. Because venom per se is used for medicinal purpose. So the sanctity of the entire process has to be maintained. Yeah. I'm done, ma'am. I just make it as short as possible. So these are some of our associations, and we are addressing many of the SDGs, as you can see, because we are talking about no poverty. A person dies, the family doesn't know what to do. We are talking about zero hunger, good health and well-being. All are included. Now this is very important. Monosha Bharti is an endeavor to create a world with more equity, equality, inclusion, and democratic participation for persons with disabilities and families which have been financially disabled due to the death or disability of the breadwinner because of snake bites. Thank you.
Yeah, so just to brief a little, we are running short of time. Now, Saurabh is a fabulous researcher. The topic and area of research is fantastic. And it's what he's doing is, I think, just awesome. You should, I recommend each one of us from any discipline, even the IICB, because the work that he's doing, it's not only chemistry, but other areas as well. So community engagement, so we are also conceptualizing some work that can be interdisciplinary across the discipline. It is not possible for him to say the fabulous work that he is doing, which is not only within India but across borders. And already his research is cited, he's doing with IITs, I think Harvard as well, right, Saurabh?
Yes, the Harvard Business School and the Columbia Business School, they are working because we create a lot of social impact. So the Harvard Business School, they are working and helping us to manage the impact which we are creating and also measure that. And the Columbia Business School team from USA actually came down to our serpentarium at Baruipur, and we are working on a life project. So apart from that, IIT Kharagpur, Indian Institute of Chemical Biology, they are also research and development partners, because venom per se is not just used for making anti-venom. Apart from that, it is basically a cocktail of protein, so it can be used, it is being used for doing research and development of cancer drugs, Alzheimer's and all, because some venom is neurotoxic, some is hemotoxic, so the scientists are finding out with that.
And just to add up, like, unfortunately, because it's, the fabulous series of special, the guests and the specialists that we have, even if we give like 2-3 hours, you will not feel bored. So these are just the glimpses. And I recommend, inviting them again and again and taking a day. I think you can take a workshop on preventing, snake bites, educating our masses how to prevent the time period between when a snake bite happens and when you take to the hospital. That's a very crucial period. There are so many things that he can educate. And we people, even we are educated, we are not educated in these areas, which can protect so many lives and so many disabilities. So thank you so much, Saurabh. Really a pleasure to have you here, and we will continue disturbing you again.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to invite Professor Mary Claskin Johnson from University of South Africa. Ma'am, I request you to please come up on the stage. Ma'am is the moderator for this session. I'd now like to call upon Professor Minipolis Emin. Sir, please. I request Hiral, MA student, to please felicitate Sir. Professor Christopher is our next speaker, and he is going to talk on coalitions, corporations and compromise, shaping inclusive education in India.
Thank you, and thank you for sticking it out until the end of the day, everybody. So great that you have stuck with us all day long. I've had the good fortune of visiting to my 3 university colleagues, your universities, each one of you, but have never come across a viper or a cobra. But thank you, Dr. Ray. That was really an amazing talk. I was on the, I don't know if you saw, I was on the edge of my seat watching what was happening. So again, thank you, audience member, thank you, dignitaries, for being with us all day today. This talk is on some preliminary research that I've done here in India, and it's called Coalitions, Corporations, and Compromise, Shaping Inclusive Education in India. It comes back to education. I know there's a few talks on education earlier. This one brings us back to it. And it's really about policy. So let me start by telling you a little bit about how I came to this study, and it's really a bit of a long story. I became interested in disability issues at the age of 6. So I grew up in a town called Buffalo, New York, which is not far from Montreal. And we had a large institution. I think you've had these in your countries as well. India, I know, has had institutions in the past where children with disabilities were essentially warehoused. And periodically this institution would have public days where people could come by and visit. They would have carnivals or festivals or whatever. And even as a young child, I got very disturbed that I got to go home and all of the children had to go back into what looked like a hospital. And when my parents explained that they were going to live there forever, it became very troubling to me. And somehow I got interested in disability issues very, very, very early as a child. I've been coming to India for a long time now. I started as a study abroad student as an undergraduate and haven't been back to this city since then. So it's been very exciting to be back and to see how things have changed over the years. I was a special education teacher for a number of years. And then during my master's program, learned about the social model of disability. And I think that's going to guide a lot of what this talk is about today. And later began to pursue this idea of rights-based interests around disability and education. I've been a collaborator with a colleague at TIS since 2015, and then learned a friend of Dr. Halder's since I thought was 2017. She reminded me today it's actually been 2011. So she is the reason why I'm here. I don't know where she is right now, but longtime friend and colleague, And so just delighted to be here. So let me tell you a little bit about this study. This one aimed to understand the processes of how inclusive education policies or inclusive education policy components come to pass, how these policies came to be. You remember Professor Ghosh talked today a little bit about how laws and policies aren't everything, but there's something. And there's something that are needed to move education systems forward. And one of my research interests is understanding how these policies come to be and how the language that's in them develops and who's pushing for that language. I did this study through the lens of civil society organizations, so the ones that are outside of governments that are often doing advocacy work. Specifically, I was also interested in the role of organizations of persons with disabilities. These are organizations that are led by and for people with disabilities themselves. The study itself is informed by political settlement theory, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that theory in just a moment. So this is the theoretical approach to the study. Up-and-coming scholars, it always helps to have a theory. So keep that in mind. That's my small advice for today. It always helps to have a theory when you're conducting a study. This one was based on a theory by a scholar named Khan, and what he realized in his own work was that governments or other organizations that hold power, they like to hold on to that power. They prefer to maintain the status quo and keep things just the way they are. And generally that happens, but periodically advocates will come along and they'll push to change those policies. They'll push to change that status quo. Maybe they'll push to change how resources are allocated, and even maybe want to change governance arrangements. So there's a status quo, you can imagine, and then there are advocates who might be unhappy with that status quo, so come by and vie to make a change. And then what Khan says is oftentimes that advocacy is on behalf of particular populations. So Hickey and colleagues call this representational politics. There's an identity group that says, this situation isn't working for us, we need to make a change, we're going to advocate for that change. And what happens when that advocacy begins is oftentimes powerful actors or governments will say, we're going to ignore this. I don't know if you have had this experience in your own advocacy. Sometimes you just get ignored by the people who hold power, right? And they'll continue to ignore until it becomes too expensive to continue to ignore. That might be economically expensive, it might be politically expensive, whatever the case. When it becomes too difficult to ignore, it just can't happen anymore. And so what happens is that those who hold the power might settle. They'll say, okay, we're going to give you this, now please stop the advocacy, right? And a settlement is borne out. And the reason why that happens is that settlement is often politically or economically less expensive than a revolution, right? So you can imagine how to somebody who holds power, losing a little of something is better than losing everything potentially to a revolution. So that's the theoretical approach that I took to this study. And here's just a diagram of how it works. So if you start clockwise at the top, powerful actors maintain the status quo. Advocates then vie for change. Small changes may be seeded, so they might give up something small to maintain the status quo. And then a new status quo emerges, and the process starts all over again. When people become unhappy with that new status quo, they might advocate for change, something might be seeded, et cetera, et cetera. So I started some research with colleagues in a small country named Lesotho, not far from where you live. Dr. Mary, yes, with an organization called the Lesotho National Federation of the Disabled. And we ended up publishing this research in Comparative Education Review, which, have you ever been an editor there? I imagine so, yes, okay. So it's a comparative education journal that came out last year. And in this research, this organization called Disabled Persons Organizations, they were advocating for inclusive education policy change. The government did not have a policy. The organizations wanted a policy, so they started a media campaign. And they essentially embarrassed the government to the point where the government said, okay, we'll make a policy change. Interestingly, part of this process was in the policy advocacy. The organization tried to meet with the government in their offices, tried to host them in the NGO offices, and the government would never speak with them. until an international organization, UNICEF, said, let's fund a meeting, let's have it at a nice hotel, let's give everybody lunch. And suddenly everybody showed up, right? We studied this whole process and how it happened. And finally, in 2019, a new policy was passed. So it could happen through this type of advocacy. Right now, there's no implementation of that policy, no plan for implementation. So what will probably happen is there'll be another round of advocacy and potentially another settlement. Again, it's kind of a circular process. But let me tell you a little bit about India, because you know more about this context than I do. And I hope you find these findings interesting. I found them fascinating and complicated. So the study aimed to answer the question, what role did civil society organizations, including disabled persons organizations, play in advocating for inclusive education elements of India's national education policy of 2020? Raise your hand if you know this policy. National Education Policy of 2020, raise your hand if you know it. I'm hoping everybody does. I'm trying to keep you awake at this late hour. All right, good. This study in particular focused on organizations of or who advocate for persons with disabilities. And the sample was 5 organizations who either advocate for persons with disabilities or are run by people with disabilities themselves. I reached these through a nomination process of people who I consider experts in the field. And I also did a policy review of the the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act, the Right to Education Act, the Foreign Currency Education Regulation Act, which is one that I'm going to describe in just a little bit. The preliminary So here's just a quick look at these organizations. I won't go through all of them and describe all of them, but I want you to notice a couple of things. One, in the second row there, you see activities. All of them were engaged, except for one, in advocacy in some way, these organizations. But if you look, all of these organizations were also doing something else. Maybe teacher training, maybe direct services to people with disabilities. They're all busy, all very busy people. And then I want you to also notice something on the bottom row. Were they involved with policy engagements, the National Policy on Education? All of them were. And then the second to last row, I want you to notice that almost all of them were receiving corporate social responsibility funds. That's something that's really important to talk about here. So let's get to this. Here's a couple of findings that came out of the study. Again, we interviewed these organizations, we heard about the work that they do. One of the things that we learned is that organizations are not likely to receive funding from international activist NGOs. So unlike Lesotho, where the organization could get money from UNICEF, a lot of these small organizations are not getting money from, say, like Oxfam or Save the Children, et cetera, that might have a more activist orientation. Instead, a lot of them are getting corporate social responsibility funds as a main source of funding. And that changes the dynamic on their advocacy a little bit, for 2 reasons. Number one, corporations aren't so interested in advocacy. How do we do this? Already? Oh my God. Okay, wind up. I have 3 minutes here to finish. All right, or maybe 1 minute. Corporate social responsibility funding, corporations weren't so interested in advocacy, instead they were interested in showing results, and so the activities of the organizations changed. Number 2, coalitions formed, which means that larger organizations had more power and access to government than smaller organizations. And then number 3, rights. Some organizations had a rights-based orientations, others treated children with disabilities as if they were an object of charity. And so these different orientations were all part of the conversations happening with government during the National Policy on Education advocacy. All right, so what I found was that it's not so much of an us versus them. It's a little more complicated. It's an us, but the us here in this case has multiple sizes, multiple shapes, and is funded through multiple places. So even though Kahn's theory says one group comes up against another group and then change happens, actually in this case, this one group was pretty complicated. That's sort of the gist of this research. I'm going to stop there and leave it up to my guests. Thank you.
Now, I'd like to call upon Dr. Samhita Barwa, Department of Social Work, Tezpur University. Ma'am, please come up on the stage. I request Sheikh Sahil, MA student, to kindly felicitate ma'am. Dr. Samhita Barwa today is going to speak on the topic Queer Ecology of Commons in Northeast India.
Being the last speaker and waiting for another excellent session on dance, I have to be really quick. And thank you everyone in this panel for being so gracious and exploring such a broad context and which relates to the classroom within and outside, and also to the whole theme of this international conference, which is on sustainability, global diversity, inclusion, and the interdisciplinary perspective. And I'm grappling with that aspect currently at the workplace that I work in, that's Tezpur University. Queer ecology is something which I have been trying to understand, and I'm hoping that today also this will be an occasion to understand this whole context and know more about it, also through your experiences, and maybe we can exchange or share ideas as we move along. So I'm trying to understand queer ecology, where we are very familiar as well as we pretend to be unfamiliar with the whole concept of being queer, or understanding the whole concept about issues related to queerness, and which is more to do with something which is beyond the binary. So when I say binary, it is nature, culture, man, woman. So all these kind of contexts are familiar, but when we are moving beyond these, that is when we locate ourselves within the lens of queerness. In this context, I am understanding queer ecology from an ecological space, and this space where it is something which is to do with the commons, right? Commons is something which all of us share, and we are in fact talking about the globe which we share, all of us from all parts of the world and all contexts and all cultures. I think this is the kind of commons that we are trying to understand, and we are trying to be part of. And that's where we locate our understanding of commons. Ecological commons refers to living spaces, surrounding environments, social networks, collective knowledge, safe spaces, and sometimes even bodies, even individual or collective bodies. So these are also sites of commons when it comes to queerness, or these are also sites where we become living, encyclopedias, I think. We become living dictionaries, we become living sources of knowledge, and sources of understanding or unveiling different possibilities, because nothing is nowadays limited, that we have to understand this concept only from this perspective. Gender should be understood only from sex and gender lens. No, it may be beyond that. I don't know. I mean, that is where I'm locating this whole concept of queer ecology. Commons in Northeast India. I'm not very sure how many of you might have heard, seen, been to the northeast of India. Probably most of you must have. Earlier in India was considered, the eastern part of India ended in Bengal. And we are right now in Bengal. And that was the kind of colonial construct which was there, and which is still there, and which still is kind of getting challenged, or it is people are trying to make noise in some parts, in some corner, in some tip of the hilltop, or in some small machan, or in some pond, or in some floodplain, or in some small place where a dam is being built and where it is being crushed, or maybe a small pride march somewhere in the corner of Meghalaya, or in the corner of Tripura, or somewhere people are trying to create the rainbow and saying that no, we exist and we are also part of India somewhere. Sometimes we also feel disconnected, alienated. Somewhere we also feel that we are not part of the commons of whole of India, but we are trying to create, or we are the custodians of the commons which are existing in that region, because your tea comes from that region, jute comes from that region, coal comes from that region, oil comes from that region, mixed varieties of herbs, millets, grains, different kinds of animals. You don't have rhinoceros anywhere else other than the northeast of India. So I think northeast of India is a custodian of so many commons. So in that context, then how do we locate the queer context or the queer ideologies, and what is queer? So I remember an activist in Kaziranga saying that, we have been living with the rhinos for ages. Why is it that now there is a reserve forest? Why is it that now we have Kaziranga National Park and it is not accessible to communities? It is not accessible to people who live in harmony with them. There is somebody in Boroland where they're growing tea gardens and they're growing a forest for the elephants. In the backdrop that there is a human-elephant conflict also going on. So these are the kinds of commons that I'm trying to talk about. These are the kind of contexts that one is trying to talk about when we are talking of the northeast of India. My research has taken me to many places in the northeast, and very, very categorically to one of the most fascinating lands of the northeast, that is Nagaland. And that is where I have done my PhD work. And this work is based on women, ecology and livelihood, a study in a Chakasang village of Nagaland. And this was also a journey where I could understand the context of queerness, how it exists in these kind of commons, and whether these commons are accessible to women, whether these kind of commons are accessible to food crop farmers, whether these commons are accessible to farming community, or these are accessible to communities who have been always looked down upon otherwise the way they have been treated in the larger context of knowledge and in the context of capabilities, right? So as I said, natural, social and cultural, these are the kind of commons, and there are non-human as well as human spaces which are shared and which are have been also spaces for conflicts. You must have already been very familiar with the Manipur conflict which is going on currently. And in fact, a lot of thoughts were also emerging from that context of commons, how it is also a struggle for the hills and the valley, the kind of struggles which is happening in that part of the world which is led to so much of mayhem. And today people have to fight for their citizenship, they have to fight for their scheduled status, they have to justify whether they are tribal enough or not. I think these are the issues. It is most importantly, it needs to be addressed in many forums and fronts. Conditions of struggles for survival, this has been a rough terrain. It has been almost left alone kind of a terrain, geographically unreached, terrain which is extremely difficult. In fact, that is how it is so wild and queer. It is not part of the mainstream. It is not part of the binary. It is not part of the market economy. It is not part of, the railway tracks, or it is not part of the big hotel industry, or it just doesn't have enough of entertainment, etc. So these are the places which are rough, which are with the most difficult spaces. So the relationship with queerness within and outside, this context becomes extremely important. For the purpose of this particular paper, I was trying to understand collective ecological rights, which is a framework which was conceptualized during the course of my PhD work. And how much time do I have? 2 minutes, okay. So it's linked to the people, especially individuals, collectives, and the livelihoods. so very deeply ingrained into this element. I was trying to understand whether queer struggles or queer movements were thinking of ecological struggles or not, were thinking of this concept of citizenship or not, whether these issues matter to them or not, or similarly, where the land movement or the anti-dam movement or the tribal movement or the anti-caste movement, whether such struggles are also understanding the context of the excluded queer people or not. So this was the kind of discourse that I was grappling with while writing this paper, and also struggling to find responses from people and asking people that what is your idea, what are your thoughts. Being from the queer community, it was easy for me to access people, to gather their consent and gather their views and their issues, and they're saying the commons are there for all, for both queer as well as non-queer people. So I guess these are contexts which are important for everyone. So streets became very vibrant during the 10 queer prides walks that I have taken in the last 10 years. And in that area, also organized 2 of them in Tezpur, in a small town, not just in big cities like Guwahati. So these are spaces where we claim spaces, streets, homes, ideas, and identities. So the biggest question is that queer commons or commons are getting queerer. So these kind of thoughts are banging me right now, and it is a concern which probably would have come across your minds, and this forum would give that scope and space to deliberate further, and we might be able to find some ways or newer ways of thinking or newer ways of discussing these kind of issues. And we have seen the dichotomy in understanding the commons and understanding the struggles associated with both human as well as natural co-relationships. So these are the thoughts that I have. Sometimes I feel inclusiveness of commons is not fully addressed, and it is just a tokenism, which is preferred, or rather, there's hardly any kind of social impact. So that is a concern, and I hope that's not what is happening in this forum, and much more is there to talk about. With these thoughts, your views matter a lot. With this, I wrap up. Thank you. Thank you so much.
We would welcome the chairpersons if they want to sum up. Noriman, okay? Please come.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I got a lot of crucial information from 3 presenters. Dr. Ray gave us the information on snake bite, and Japan we also have snake bites, but it's not that serious. So it was kind of surprising facts I learned. But I sort of transferred to the fact of a traffic accident in Japan. It's happening a lot, and all of a sudden their lives change. And also, it is really important, to educate people, traffic safe, education, and and also, children, and also the treatment, after the accident. So it's sort of a similarity I could, find. So, it is really important for India to understand the importance of, how you guys are going to prevent from snake bites, but for other countries, you can transfer the idea, to the serious problems what's happening in your community or country. So it was really critical information. Thank you very much. And Dr. Johnston, actually one of my doctoral students is from Lesotho, so we're going to talk about that later on. But anyway, I used to be a committee member of the government, initiative of inclusive education, and I was not wise enough to deal with the government people. So I kept saying that how important it is, to promote inclusive education all the time. And nowadays, they don't invite me as a committee member because I talk too much, maybe. So, it is really important how we're going to make government listen to us, and how we're going to make a good friendship, with each other, even though sometimes we're going to be angry about them, but still, it is a wise idea how wisely we can, work with them. So, I just got that good information from him, so thank you very much. And Dr. Bakor, Yeah, thank you very much. And I just remember, one of my colleagues saying the terminology in diversity is originally from, biology, ecology. So, while inclusion, diversity, we tend to be thinking of those kind of concepts, only by human, but also we really need to consider, those aspects by considering the different species, or and how we're gonna work on the keep our environment healthy. So thank you very much. Yeah, I think those are really great presentations. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to all the erudite chairpersons, moderators, and speakers who have enriched us with their expertise and knowledge. Thank you. We'll have the cultural function now. The theme of the cultural function is Dance with Me, We, Us, and the conference theme will be presented through the Nritya Natya.
Audience for being an interesting audience. If you have any questions, anybody? For any of the speakers? If not, we won't waste any more time. I just want to thank Dr. Santoshi Halder for doing such an excellent job of arranging this international conference. The first day went off very well, and now we look forward to a very interesting cultural function. Please stay and look forward to the function.